Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lit Happens. Today, you are joining me, Belle, for another solo episode on the English Studies course. And as you can see by our banner on display, if you are watching this episode on YouTube, it is all about achieving through English, one of the electives in the English Studies course. So what I want to do is just take you guys today through a bit of a breakdown of the module and the rubric itself, then taking a look at all the outcomes, including the understanding and responding points. Then I want to discuss a little bit with you guys the text types and some text suggestions that might be helpful, as well as activities that can really help support you in the Achieving Through English unit. So let's get started. What I want to mention before we begin is, teachers who have taught English studies in the previous syllabus will note that this was the module that we would all begin with our new Year 11 cohort in Term 1. We would all start with this Achieving Through English elective, and it is a fabulous elective. It's a really practical one. In this particular focus area, students are developing an understanding of and even a practical competence in the use of language that allows access to opportunities in schooling, training, and employment. So this was a really nice opening unit to really get a sense of your students, what they're hoping to achieve, how long they're hoping to stay in school for, and what their goals are for life after school and what life after school looks like. And so it was a lovely course to kind of get students thinking about their future if they hadn't already started, and also to do some more practical activities in terms of English reading and writing skills that would be really real world and applicable to students. And most of you teaching studies will know that getting English studies students engaged in an English lesson is quite difficult. For the most part, they are students who do not necessarily have university aspirations. Sometimes you might even have students who are struggling a little bit in the reading and writing skills necessary for, stage 6. So it's a nice little unit here to get those things in motion. Now, obviously, with our new curriculum or syllabus, I should say, that's come out for studies, we no longer begin with this one. We begin with a reading to write transition to English studies, which, look, you can still incorporate a lot of the real life and applicable reading and writing skills that we talked about. I know I've heard of schools who sort of towards the end of the term might do a bit of the Achieving Through English activities that they used to do. So schools are being really flexible in how they're using it. Now, in terms of the breakdown, we're looking at here more practical and real world communication. We're really preparing our students in this unit for those more social, community, and workplace contexts that they're going to engage with. And so therefore, when we are reading texts and examining texts, we are looking and exploring how language forms and features are going to shape meaning. So not just what the text is saying about the real world or is representing about the real world, but also how they are expressing that. We've also got an emphasis in this rubric to look at some different modes and medium of meaning and how they influence meaning and structure. So we've got a variety of things here. We might be looking at digital text, print text, visual text. Films, novels, biographies, drama are possible here, although I do feel a lot of the time this unit lends itself to very much informative writing, reflective writing, potentially some more kind of persuasive and opinion-based writing as well. And we'll look at that further down as we go. I think with this unit, what works really well is involving a variety of everyday texts that students can engage with, things that they will see out in the world as young adults, as opposed to just traditional literature. I think there are other electives in here or within the English Studies course that lends itself to more traditional literature. So I like that idea of focusing on a variety of everyday texts. And that can be different text types in different forms, in different modes, but things that students would see, on a day-to-day basis. And that will really have this Achieving Through English concept become a bit more applicable to them too. I think here what we're really looking at is this idea of real functional literacy skills that students can apply beyond just the classroom here. And so I think if that's your kind of guiding emphasis for the rubric here, then students, tend to get quite excited because it is that nice opportunity for them to spend class time thinking about what are their goals, what are their hopes, what are their dreams. And, as a teacher, even giving you an opportunity to, support them in creating a bit of a plan, perhaps. I know I've used the guidance of the careers advisor before in this unit, which has been really awesome, just getting them to come in and do a bit of workshopping and help with a bit of discussion. This is a really cool unit where you can engage in how students would engage in the workforce. So not just how they would apply for work and what they've got to do, but how they have to present themselves in an interview, how they might need to communicate with, different members of their workplace, even just the communication skills needed when you're working with your colleagues versus working with supervisors and the likes. So this is actually really lovely, I find, to already talk about the ways in which students are engaging in the real world anyway. So obviously paid work comes into this. A lot of students might have some part-time jobs. They might also be supporting family small businesses. So this is a great opportunity to discuss the idea of small business as well. And a lot of students are engaging in unpaid volunteer work, which very much so is setting the foundation for them to, be successful in future employment as well. So that's just a little bit about the rubric itself and the AMIs, and I just like to focus that idea on it's that functional literacy skills that are really focusing on practical real world application, whether that is TAFE, university, or full-time employment in the workplace. And I think that's really lovely because students will feel very seen in this unit. And it's very personal to them, so therefore feels very achievable, no pun intended. I might move on then to our second segment. So I want to look at now just how we make meaning in achieving through English, based on the new outcomes and the new understanding and responding dot points. So I thought I'd just quickly take you through these. As I mentioned in the previous episode where we looked at the new studies syllabus, these electives can be done in year 11 or 12. So really just, depending on where it works for your school, what works for your school. I know this unit used to be the really popular kind of that first sort of unit of work. I've heard of a lot of schools doing it now kind of in the third term. Perhaps even after they've kind of completed some of their exam prep, and then in that third term before they transition into the HSC course, giving them that opportunity to, explore what they might be interested in. You might have some students that are on the cusp of whether they want to leave or stay. And so this kind of unit might give them a bit more insight into what they want to do here. It's also really nice when that, there are students that are turning 17 and planning to sign out and or are just getting through year 11 to get that prelim certificate, and then they will be moving on to, their future and what their future plans are. So there's a lot of flexibility here. Obviously, you could also do it in year 12. You might do it on the back end of a certain term and the start of the next, depending on, where it fits. It might be a unit that you even do, in the final term in term 3, because it's not so content heavy. I think this unit, it might work in that term where you might be devoting a little bit of time to, the trials and students who are sitting the exam. And then this gives an opportunity for perhaps students who are struggling with the trials. You could, alleviate some of that tension with this kind of unit here, and also give your students who are definitely not sitting the exam some opportunity to do this as well. So when we are looking at the outcomes here, we've got, whether it's 11 or 12, this idea of their ability to explain ideas across a variety of texts, their ability to analyze how authors shape meaning and influence audiences. They're looking at connections between texts. They are also looking here at critical and creatively writing texts, and also looking at these really clear communication skills, terminology, grammar, the like. And so we're looking at the understanding point straight from the syllabus. We've got how language forms and features communicate ideas and shape meaning, the difference between explicit and implicit meaning, the impact of mode and medium on structure and communication, how audience purpose and context influence meaning in the real world text. So I think that's a really nice way to look at perhaps what your weeks 1 to 6 of the term will be. What kind of texts are you going to be introducing where you will be able to support them in examining what the forms and features are and how they're communicating ideas about workplaces. I think the point about the difference between explicit and implicit meaning is really interesting. So, you might be on Seek with students and getting them to look at, some of the requirements of their work and perhaps what's explicitly stated, even in terms of like skills or behavior in the workplace. There's almost, I think I say to my guys, this unspoken contract of how we generally behave and interact as professional human beings, as, responsible, effective human beings, and how that might be more implicit in nature. So also what you'd be taking through your students in these 1 to 6 weeks is this impact of mode and medium on structure and communication. So looking at how those different text types, when they change in their form, how they're actually shaping not just how you understand the communication, but how you respond to that as well. And so looking at how audience purpose and context influence meaning in the real world. So looking at these real world scenarios or examples and applying that understanding of the audience, the purpose of this text or information, and what's happening on a contextual or societal level in this particular text or example. We will get into some examples shortly though. And then kind of lastly, we want to look at this idea of the responding. So this is where students get to actually reflect their understanding of the module through their own composition. So here we want to, 1, compose texts that express attitudes, values, and perspectives. Notice that's quite broad in nature, but a way that you could specify it is in terms of workplace, in terms of communication. So you might be looking at different types of workplaces and what attitudes might be acceptable in one and not so acceptable in other, what values might be present within certain industries, perhaps even looking at a company and, supporting your students in reading their values or their mission statement and looking at, I think that that's become an increasingly important thing in the modern workplace, especially over the last few years. Every big company or institution seems to have a bit of a mission statement. So even maybe discussing students, the evolution of that and the nature and the reason for that. And also looking at different perspectives within the workplaces, potentially even depending on positions within the workplace and different perspectives, between, I guess, employers, employees, and even customers as well. Then there's a last point here to apply appropriate forms and structures to effectively communicate ideas. So suppose here we're looking at if it's an informative text type, have they got the right forms and structures to allow them to be informative about, the text or the topic of their choosing? If it's a persuasive piece, if it's something reflective about their future, have they used the components of reflective writing? I think that's going to work really, really nicely here. So just to recap on that one, we've gone through the outcomes, the fact that they will adjust slightly depending on whether you are doing this unit in Year 11 versus Year 12, and that the understanding and responding key points stay the same regardless of 11 or 12, and just kind of the nature of them makes them really easily applicable and also modifiable, or there is that option here to make them a little bit more specific if necessary. So a lot of room for movement here depending on your particular studies cohort. Okay, so in the new syllabus now, we want to look at for achieving through English, what might that look like in terms of a text focus? So what students going to be reading, viewing, or creating in this Achieving Through English unit. So if you look at the rubric and the syllabus, they would like an engagement of everyday texts, a range of different text types in a range of different modes and media. So this is a really nice unit where you can do a medley of different texts and not have to worry so much about honing in on a particular, novel or film like you might in some of the other electives. This is a really nice opportunity for a lot of different short, sharp, and sweet texts that represent different modes. So if we're looking at informative text here, then that would be one kind of bracket of everyday text. So we might be looking at articles to do with workplaces. This might be people reflecting what their particular career is like. It might even be an article to do with, customers' response to situations. This could be as generic or as specific as you'd like it to be. You could even encourage students to try and find an article to do with a particular workplace or industry that they are interested in and get them to examine what is being represented there. Reports might be really useful here as well. These could be really factual reports looking at the stats of a particular job or career or industry. Websites here are going to be really useful. Seek.com is a great and free one. Students could spend a bit of time looking up different industries or positions of work and even doing some interpretation and some comparison charts. And, you could really guide your students here to compare even what seems to be the attributes needed, the values, the skills that they would have to engage in, compare the wages. This is a really, really practical way to get students to actually think long-term about potentially a career that they might be interested in. Fact sheets will be really useful in this informative text space as well. There are a lot out there when you're looking at like Fair Work Australia will have a lot of great accessible resources and information that you could do as a whole class, or again separate and have students break off and do things that are slightly more specific to their chosen career. The other thing that you could do here is study some persuasive text. So you could look at speeches to do with workplace. Opinion pieces would be a really big one that relate to that kind of article form and actually can allow students to engage with that dot point about, perspectives and attitudes. So get them to think a little bit beyond just the practicality of a particular job opportunity, but also look at potential, side effects, for lack of a better word, or, other potential issues that, they're not aware of as of yet, because they might be teenagers who haven't worked before. So all these things, advertisements would be really good here as well. Even looking at ad campaigns for different sectors. If we turn on TV, we'll find often that there might be some governmental ads, engaging in things like mining, for example, or the police force, for example. So these are really great ways to break up the informational text, is to go in that kind of physical, multimodal, I suppose, mode. So in terms of that, you might even encourage a student to look at some social media posts here, some podcasts or some videos out there relevant to that particular workplace as well. Visual text here might be really useful, infographics, posters, images, and this is where they can really be looking at that element of implicit and explicit meaning and just how meaning is shaped through those digital components and not just the written text form. So another thing that students might be doing in this unit text-wise is they might look at some workplace and community texts. So they might look at forms or letters, instructions, even emails, even looking at media texts like newsreels or news reports, from one of the media chains, and really engage in their understanding of bias and perspective. As teachers, we could use our own industry as a big example as to, the controversy that often occurs when there's any sort of discussion about teacher wages or things like that. And that's not, singled out just to our industry. There are many other examples out there. But I think in the studies course, you really need to kind of show first and model for them, and then give them that opportunity to find their own. I have found personally that has worked really well in the past. And if there are students that are really stuck or they don't know, I might have like a class kind of text or strategy, but also allow some differentiation when students can go and direct that into what they're particularly interested in that workplace. So, when we're looking at these texts, what have I done before? I've definitely used Seek. I like that TV show Undercover Boss. That's a really cool show to get students looking at different professions, but looking at that difference in the kind of power dynamic between employees and employers, looking at attitudes, perspectives, and bias that come both ways, sort of, assumptions that we make of our employers and assumptions that employers might make of employees, and even assumptions that customers might have about the way that things should be managed or handled, or the way we should engage. So those episodes are really easily found. You can find them on YouTube. ClickView, I definitely found some off the ClickView platform, and they are really nice even just to engage students in discussion, because it's that nice, easy visual format. It's not a difficult text. It's not inappropriate in any way. It's a really nice access point. In that regard, you might find some documentaries as well in certain industries, and so perhaps the visual component might support that. I like to look at even things like the quarantine ads that come from the government, and sort of the customs information that they have is really cool. And there are also documentaries you can find, even short clips online from different industries. I've used that before. I often use this particular unit as more of a workshop unit. I know at a school that I've worked at where we taught this, we really use this opportunity to get them to look at SEEK, get them to look at Fair Work guidelines, get them to look at awards online, and then get them to consider that in light of advertising campaigns, in light of the documentary or the TV show formats, and then engage in a really practical workshop component where we used to assess them through the creation of a resume, cover letter, and they had to do a mock interview presentation as well, which was really lovely because you're hitting all those modes, but you're also giving students that practical practice, and it's fun. Get them to, if they can, dress up or bring a coat or something. And I remember one year we actually had the career advisor sitting on it with us as well, which made it feel a little bit more official, because it wasn't just their English teacher, it was somebody who's, targeting that idea of career and life after school. So there are a lot of really practical things you can do here. I think no matter what text they're looking at, we're trying to guide them in identifying how language, structure, and medium can influence meaning here. And we want to support students in creating their own practical texts here that are tailored to specific purposes and audience. There's no reason why they can't create a bit of a medley of texts where they've perhaps completed a cover letter and a resume. We might actually get them to produce a bit of a reflection as to why they want that particular career, why they think it aligns with their values. We could engage in a little bit of creative writing, sort of an in the day or in the moment of an experience of a worker in that field. And even doing some presentations or creating a bit of an advertisement for that career that they're interested in. There's a lot that can be done here that's really practical, really fun, but will also allow students to showcase their understanding of how language shapes meaning. So just quickly, one more thing I want to say on this topic of the text that we might be engaging in terms of how we might link it to outcomes. So if we're looking at outcome 1 and this explaining of ideas, your informative text work really nicely here, because students can really practice their examination of clear explanations of information, and that could be a bit of a model for them in creating their own clear explanations. Another one is analyzing meaning. So with outcome 2 and analyzing meaning, you might want to be using your advertisements, your speeches, and your media text here to explore how language and context influence ideas. Outcome 3, which is about more connections between texts, you might be looking at comparing different news reports, comparing different podcasts and points of views, looking at even potentially social media posts here, and getting them to build this skill where they're identifying this relationship between texts and also why they might be differing here. Outcome 4, when it comes to composing the text, we might be creating emails here, speeches, blog posts, multimodal posts, visual campaigns. There's a lot that can be done here. And lastly, with that last point, which is all about that accuracy of communication here, letting them engage in those formal writing tasks like the cover letters, like the reports, like the opinion pieces, I think might allow them to practice that development of their control of the grammar, the terminology that's needed, and how to use evidence or fact kind of correctly here in these text types. So there's some ideas there I think you guys can take away, and obviously whatever assessment or text type you're getting them to do with this module will really depend on what the rest of your scope and sequence is doing for that year of English studies. Okay, so lastly now, just to wrap up this episode, looking at some teaching activities that might help bring this Achieving Through English module to life. Again, if I can lead a little bit with the outcomes here. So, with that second outcome, which is all about language features, audience purpose, and implicit meaning, you might be engaging in text deconstruction here with the students, getting them to annotate an ad or an article, looking at the form, looking at the structure, then the language features, then getting them to do some inference and read between the line and look at what information seems to be more implicit here rather than explicit. You might be getting them to compare and connect different texts. So students could analyze 2 texts on the same career or the same issue within the workplace. Actually, that comes to mind. I know I've looked at news articles about workplace bullying, not just factual ones that you'd find from Fair Work and stuff like that online, but even sort of media articles where cases had gone forward. I think the one that I used from memory was the Lorna Jane bullying kind of scandal that occurred. I think that might have been a class action lawsuit. Don't quote me on that. But I mean, I'm sure, unfortunately, there are many examples we can find with kind of those kinds of issues in the workplace. So getting them to compare and connect these different news reports, or compare and connect these different blogs, vlogs, or experiences. And that way they could be really looking at similarities, differences, and connections here. You might actually also get them to do a bit of a mode switching task. So students might be transforming a text from one form into another. So perhaps they've got an infographic that has to be turned into an informative text, or vice versa. They might be getting reading an opinion piece and creating an persuasive image or poster that goes with that. That's really nice, just a creative way to get them to consider the difference in mode and meaning, and how mode and meaning might influence the choices, the textual and language choices that are made. Even things like audience rewrites. So depending on what the text is, an article is, having your students to consider how it might change in its tone, in its style, in its expression, if it was, being changed for a different audience member. So how that same issue or idea might be presented to a teenager not quite out of school yet, to somebody who is an adult now just starting in the workforce, to somebody who might have been in that career for a long time. There's definitely things that you can do here. I think the big one here is the real world writing. So allowing them to engage with and create emails, allowing them to access real job applications, and then look at how they might create a cover letter and a resume that might go with that, and even giving them some interview questions and how they might practice their engagement with those. That's really nice for, group work, whole class, pair work. There's a lot of individual work, giving students a moment to think about how they might respond and then compare that with another student, see what they can pick up there. Yeah, I think the practical component here is really, really important with the Achieving Through English unit. When you're looking at that rubric, yes, we want them to engage with these everyday texts, but they, I think, are ultimately doing so that they could produce their own everyday text so that they can use the English language to achieve their goals, no matter where they are finding themselves in the future, whether that's further study or full-time employment or apprenticeship. There's a lot of opportunity here for students to really see that English is not just we're studying a text in class, but it's about the skills it's going to leave me with moving forward into the future here. And it's a wonderful unit for a lot of reflection and feedback as well. Peer reflection, individual reflection. There's a lot that can be done here. It's a really great, fun, practical unit that you could, mix with a variety of text types, with a variety of modes, and have a lot of fun and actually get to know your students. I know I learned a lot about my studies kids through this particular unit of work, and it's just so refreshing to be able to slow down in a way that you are just discussing what your students think and what they want to do, and allowing them to have that form of reflection of what things do I maybe need to work on or do to help myself when I'm in that future. And there's no teacher behind me kind of pushing me or checking my things. What are some practical skills that they could take away? So that brings us to the end of my solo episode in the English Studies series on the Achieving Through English elective. I hope this just gives some new ideas to any teachers who might have been teaching studies for a while but feeling like they're in a little bit of a slump. Happens to me quite often, if I'm being honest. And sometimes you just hear something that you're like, love that, might try that, could incorporate that. And hopefully this was helpful for, any new scheme teachers that might be teaching studies for the first time in this new course. And Achieving Through English is one of the chosen electives. So just some ideas to help everybody get started or get thinking. As always, if you have any questions, contact us through our socials or our email. We have lots of other content coming up on YouTube, on the streaming servers, on our Teachers Pay Teachers account. So keep an eye out for those. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again, or you will hear from us again, I should say, next week. Episodes come out every Wednesday. Thanks so much for listening to Lit Happens. Bye.